She literally races around the hive, tears open the cells of her sisters and stabs them to death. Hi, it's Hamish Tamay. I run Bowral Beekeeping. We offer agritourism experiences, plus also do conventional beekeeping and training, supply bees to people, a little bit of honey, and live a pretty amazing lifestyle here in the Southern Highlands. Inside the hive, 75,000 female worker bees, 1 queen, and 200 or 300 male bees. In the female worker bee lives about 40 days, and we're aware of more than 60 different jobs that she can possibly do in her 40-day life cycle, from being a guard bee, to being a scout bee, to being a mortuary bee, collecting dead bees inside the hive and taking them out, cleaning the hive, feeding the queen, more than 60 different roles. A queen is genetically identical to all her daughters. What the bees do, they go and find the very last egg that the queen laid and literally make a larger wax cell around it and feed it differently. So the difference between a worker bee and a queen is the food she gets given. So she gets this amazing thing called royal jelly. The very youngest bees, they have a little gland at the back of their head. They physically wipe it off. Every bee in the colony gets 1 day of this stuff, but the queen gets it for her entire life. And it transforms what would otherwise be a standard female worker bee that will live for 40 days into basically a super bee. She has a different head, different shaped wings, her rear legs are different, long tapered abdomen, huge amounts of eggs. The queen can choose the gender of the egg she lays. So when she lays an egg, she can choose whether it's going to be a male bee or a female bee. The other thing is longevity. The queen lives for 5 years. And so for years, people have been researching about the health and the longevity benefits of humans taking royal jelly. And most beekeepers, we collect a little bit for ourselves. I have some every day. And I'm 138 now. Around 7 to 10 days after hatching, they do some orientation flights to work out where they are in relationship to the environment. And then basically, every afternoon around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, in fact it's going to happen soon, all the male bees from all these hives behind us are going to fly out, and there's a spot about 2 k's from here, which I like to call the local disco, but it's technically called the drone congregation area, where all the male bees in the district fly up there looking for love. If they successfully mate though, they die. So, you know, it's kind of almost a mixed blessing. Do they die happy, fulfilled their life purpose? But I don't know. It's better not to think of them as individual bees. Think of them as a superorganism, probably weighing about 6 to 8 kilos. Now that organism actually makes decisions for the health of the hive. The queen isn't actually in charge. She's just a function of that organism. But at any one time, the queen can actually be deposed. If the colony makes a decision that the queen is not laying well, the colony will literally turn around and kill the queen, and they'll generate a whole new queen from scratch. So at the bottom of each flower, there's a thing called a nectary, and literally a little gland producing a sweet, sticky liquid to attract the animals. Then they go flower to flower, they fill up their honey crop inside their body. It starts mixing with enzymes inside their honey crop. Now these are the slightly older bees, right? And so they then race back to the hive, and through a process called trophallaxis, it actually looks like they're kissing. It's so freaking cute, and literally passes the nectar, which has been partially processed through the enzyme in their body, to a younger bee. Now, of course, the younger bee has different enzymes because she's in a different life cycle, and she takes it into her body. And then she'll race around and she might deposit it in the lower box, the brood box. And then at that stage, another bee that night might take it up and suck it up into their body, mixes with different enzymes because of different ages, and eventually they'll take it up to the top box. And at that point, it's been through 4 or 5 bees, and it's still quite watery. And inside the hive, they maintain it at 36 degrees. They leave it open to the air, and that 36 degrees evaporates some of the water out until it gets to 14% water. Then they put a cap of wax on the outside. They need protein. The protein is from the pollen. But they actually have like little Velcro patches on their lower legs, and they actually roll it with a little bit of nectar and squish it onto their legs, and they fly back. It looks like they're wearing little gumboots. It's interesting, the pollen in its raw form is actually indigestible to the bees. They get the pollen, get some nectar, a little bit of honey, and a spore of wild yeast they collect, and literally knead it inside, like as though they're making dough, and they push it inside one of the cells, and the 36 degrees inside the hive does a controlled lactic fermentation, breaks down the spiky cell wall of the pollen, and releases the protein, which the bees can eat. They are making protein bread, vegan protein bread. Yes, you should go to Woolworths and Coles or any big supermarket and buy honey. Buy Australian honey though. A couple of years ago, they did some testing to test a bunch of the honeys coming in from overseas, and they found that a whole bunch of them weren't actually honey. They were corn syrup. And some of them had colours, some had flavouring, but it wasn't actually honey. It's a lot of effort to make honey, right? Each bee, the 40 days, their entire life, less than a teaspoon. There's different kinds of honey, because the honey you get at the supermarket is actually blended honey. They go to beekeepers around Australia and just go, oh, look, I'll buy a ton of honey off you, and a ton of honey from you, and they blend it like whiskey. This is now getting into geeky territory about single floral source honeys. I'm in an urban environment. There's gardens all around here. There's tulips and there's forests up there. Almost by nature, the honey that we get here is a mix of different floral sources. If you want to get a single floral source honey, and this is where beekeepers get geeky, because it's like single malt scotch, right? They first of all identify a forest, like yellow box, big native tree. They then use Google Maps or a whole bunch of handed down through the generations kind of knowledge, specific forests in specific areas. Then they need to negotiate with the landowner or the national parks to get access, and they need to find minimum 10-kilometre radius of these trees. Then they need to know when it's going to flower. Then they take in whether it's 2 hives or 2,000 hives. They take it in just as those trees are about to flower. And often the beekeepers actually camp beside their hives, because what they're actually doing is watching those flowers of those yellow box or whatever it is, and they're watching the bees going nuts on this big floral event. And eventually those flowers will start coming with it a little bit, and that means to become pollinated. At that point, the really geeky guys take the entire top of the box off with all the honey inside now, take that away in a truck and extract it. That way they know that the honey in those frames is predominantly that one floral source. You'd be amazed at the different colours and textures and tastes that different floral source honeys can have. It is quite remarkable. So in South America, there is a very specific rhododendron that only flowers every 7 years, and it's said that the honey from that rhododendron has psychotropic characters. I'd like to try this, just purely for experimentation. I did live in Nimbin for a little while, and there's always the joke that if the bees found a marijuana plantation, would they get stoned, or would the honey taste different? And I did the research on that one. It doesn't actually work that way. Look, so probably the most expensive honey in the world, in fact, is actually from Australian native bees. These are all European honeybees, Apis melliflora. There's 9 different races of those bees. They're brought in from Europe, right? 200 years ago into Australia. However, in Australia we have over 1,700 native bees. And of those 1,700, there's 7 of them live in a colony like European honeybees do. But they produce honey in such tiny amounts. As a comparison, a strong hive, European honeybee hive in a good flowering area, they can make 135, 150 kilos, 200 kilos of honey a year. One of these Australian native hives, they might, at its peak, make a kilo of honey a year. And it's dark, almost black, and it doesn't actually taste that nice. It tastes quite medicinal, but that's probably the most expensive and rarest honey that you can buy. It would be $500 or $600 a kilo. Manuka is the New Zealand name for leptospermum, which is a tea tree. We've got a lot of it in this district. So it's not a native tea tree to New Zealand, but they called it Manuka honey. And they had a really good marketing team on board there. And it's got very good qualities to it. Once again, slightly medicinal. A very high quality Manuka honey is actually not that tasty, but has incredibly good antibacterial qualities. So if you've got like a rash or a burn, they actually use it for medical external use. So that's quite expensive. Basically, it's like 2 little parallel swords, and each one has got a little barb on it, and one of them's got an even bigger barb. And in the middle of the 2 of them is like a little hollow. And so basically it goes in and spreads open a little bit, and through the middle of that hollow is the venom flows through there. At the back of that is some muscles with a venom pouch, and that's attached to the abdomen of the bee, right? So when the bee is threatened, they'll come and fly around you, give a high-pitched noise. When you hear that, if you're smart, you leave. And if they do sting you, they know they're going to die. So the answer is yes, they're going to die. They lift their butt in the air, and they literally jackhammer their tail into you, and they're trying to get that barb in as deep as possible, and then they literally spin on you with pivoting around that barb. At that point, the venom pouch is activated and the muscles start twitching and starts pumping in the venom into you. And at that point, the bee physically walks away, and the muscles and the venom pouch is left behind. And actually, if you look really closely, it's still actually throbbing, and that's the muscles pumping the venom into you. And the bee dies. And at the same time, they put a little chemical marker on you, a pheromone, and it's telling the other bees, here is the spot. And so if you don't leave, you will get more bees going at you. You really want to leave. Or if you do get stung, if you're actually a beekeeper, you actually puff smoke on it, that diffuses that pheromone, or just get your water bottle out and wash off the pheromone. People get in touch, go, oh, we want to do some venom therapy, some apitherapy. I go, oh, you're crazy. They want to literally pay me to get stung, right? So in that situation, I just say, look, I will organise you a beehive at your own home, and you can get stung as often as you want. But taps into why they want to get stung. There are some remarkable chemicals in venom. People attribute health values to it. So one of the myths about bee stings is that it's good for arthritis. I'll get stung a couple of times a week, and I've got arthritis in my shoulder, and I've been stung all my life. So venom and arthritis, purely a research sample of one. It doesn't help. By weight, bee venom is the most powerful venom in the world. Luckily, the dosage that we get from a bee is so small. Look, very few people have genuine anaphylaxis. Some people have a strong allergic reaction, but if you have 120 bee stings, you're going to be pretty crook. I've got friends who tell me stories about getting stung. One guy was working with a land care group, and they were cleaning up some rubbish in the bush, and they picked up an old suitcase. A colony of bees was in there, like they'd swarmed and set up home in there. He got 140 stings, and he went into a coma. So when you get stung, get your fingernail and scratch that little stinger out as soon as you can. Almost immediately it's going to stop hurting. Just for normal people, what I do is take some antihistamine tablets. Basically inside the venom is histamine, and that causes swelling and itching. And that's probably the most reaction that people ever get. Bees are incredibly important for our continued survival. Probably about 35% of all the food that we eat at the supermarket has been pollinated by a bee. If we lose bees, we are putting a threat basically up to 35% of our common foods. And of course, bees aren't going to die across the planet overnight. If you get one region of Australia maybe that has collapse of bee numbers, suddenly they can't produce, let's call it almonds or stone fruit, apples or whatever. It means that the places that do have them, the prices are going to go up. Should people get into backyard beekeeping? The answer is yes. At no point in history has it been more important for people to get into backyard beekeeping. The more bees around, the better pollination rates, the better the impact on literally your pasture, let alone your fruits and vegetables. And also, when you get a hive of your own, you're actually tapping into a really mystical kind of connection with the world. And it's actually beyond kind of science. You really do feel a deep connection to your bees, and somehow through them into the cycle of the world around you.